What's up guys? Welcome back to my channel. I've tried to record this intro like 8 times and I just keep getting sidetracked, or I feel so out of breath, and it's just been rough. But you already know what this video is by the title, my first trimester update. As many of you know, I'm well into my second trimester. I'm actually halfway through my pregnancy, which is insane, but it took me a minute to film this video for a lot of different reasons. My first trimester was just so rough and stressful for so many different reasons, which I'll get into, that I feel like once I started to feel better, I was just enjoying that, and we're approaching the end of the season. So things in this household have just been very, very crazy, but I'm finally had the time to just sit down and tell you all about my first trimester. So I have it literally all written down. I wrote down how I felt every week of my first trimester. I have stopped doing that. It faded pretty quickly after the first trimester, but I basically wrote down every single week and what I was feeling that week in my first trimester. So I'll just like go through my notes and tell you. I think I'm gonna start out with the symptoms that I had before I found out I was pregnant, that definitely were pointing to me being pregnant, but I didn't recognize the symptoms at all. As many of you know, Kyle and I weren't trying, so I wasn't expecting to be pregnant, and a lot of the pregnancy symptoms that you get can also, you know, be your period symptoms. So anyways, I didn't, when I look back on it, I'm like, wow, yeah, you had so many symptoms, but in the moment I didn't view them that way. So I'll just go through them with you. So I was 3 weeks and 4 days when I found out I was pregnant, which I think is pretty early. I feel like most people don't find out until like 4 to 5 weeks, because usually you've missed your period and all that kind of stuff. I still was a week away from my period starting when I tested. I went through the story, and you can go watch my other video of me announcing that I'm pregnant, where I kind of tell you the story of how I found out and all that good jazz. So if you want that, go there. I'm not going to retell it. But I was 3 weeks and 4 days when I found out that I was pregnant. It was January 4th, so right after New Year's. And here are the symptoms that I had before I tested, that looking back I was like, oh yeah, wow. I had really bad heartburn, which when I was home it made sense because I was eating terribly. I was drinking. Like when I would go to drink, I would get a beer. That usually gives me heartburn. I was eating fried food. Like I was just eating so bad. So the heartburn to me, I was like, oh, it's because I'm eating terrible. My boobs are super sore, but I get really, really sore boobs before my period. So I didn't think anything about that. I had really bad congestion, which is actually a sign of pregnancy, but I thought because I had gone from California to Indiana that I was just congested from the traveling. I was constipated, which TMI, but that's also a sign of pregnancy because you have so many hormones, it like backs things up a little bit. I had really bad cramps, headaches, I was bloated, I was exhausted. Like I usually do not struggle with the time change between Indiana and California. It's about a 3-hour time difference, and usually I can go home, go to sleep, and wake up the next morning just ready to rock and roll. But I could not get out of bed. My mom would wake me up to go to the gym with her at like 8-9 o'clock, which usually I adjust to pretty quickly because I still went to bed at like 9 p.m. Indiana time, and I could not get up. I was sleeping all day, all the time. And even when I wasn't sleeping, I was so tired. My mom made multiple comments about how I didn't need more caffeine and I didn't need more coffee, but I kept drinking it because I was so exhausted. I just felt so tired. I also was struggling to breathe, which is 1,000 times worse now. And I was starving. Like I just ate and ate and ate and ate, and I felt like I was a bottomless pit. But usually before I start my period, I'm like that, and I think most women are probably like that. So anyways, those are the symptoms that I had before I tested positive. And then I felt completely fine and normal. Those symptoms that I had before I found out that I was pregnant are pretty much the only symptoms that I had that whole week. And then when week 4 came around, the things that were different was just that I usually have pretty clear skin. I started to get really bad body acne. I started to get really bad headaches. I was still pretty starving, and something that's really weird is that I had super sensitive gums, which is also a pregnancy symptom. Like I would just brush my teeth and my gums would bleed, and that's never happened to me before. So my gums were super sensitive. So that's really all that changed from when I found out through week 4. And at this point I thought that I wasn't gonna have morning sickness. I thought I beat it. I thought I was like one of the lucky people who didn't experience it, and I was very wrong. Because week 5 came, and that was the first time I threw up for morning sickness, was during week 5. I was still constipated. I had really bad heartburn. It was, I literally wrote down PMS times like a million. I cried over literally everything. I started just taking pictures of myself crying because it was that ridiculous. Like I was bawling, but I knew how ridiculous it was for me to be bawling. Like that's how emotional I was. And that period of time is when my nausea started, and I literally couldn't eat anything unhealthy without throwing it up. So I was mainly just eating like fruits and vegetables, but I was still able to eat enough. But at that point I was so hungry to having absolutely no appetite because the nausea started. And when week 6 came, that's when it really just like, that's what it did to me. Like just, it was awful. I was throwing up all the time. I was drinking only noodle soup and fruit. Those are the only food I was eating. But for the most part, I really wasn't eating, if I'm being honest. I was throwing up 5, 6, 7 times a day, throwing up water, throwing up anything I put into my body. It was kind of like fingers crossed when I ate like noodle soup or something that it stayed down. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. Most of the time it didn't. So I was struggling. I was very sick. And then week 7, I actually got nausea medication. It kind of helped, but not really. I was able to keep more food down. I was able to eat like rice cakes, pretzels, crackers, and I was able to actually keep those down. I wasn't before. And I also started developing like really sore like jaw muscles, which I don't know if that's a pregnancy thing, but I wrote it down. And then basically between week 8 all the way until probably week 15, which is into the second trimester a little bit, I was insanely sick. I couldn't eat anything. Food never sounded good. I was throwing up everything I was eating. It was miserable. Even water was hard for me to keep down. I couldn't eat pretzels anymore because they tasted like butter. Like all the foods I was eating those first few weeks, I wasn't able to eat anymore. I couldn't stand chicken noodle soup anymore. I was struggling, like big time struggling. I was so sick. I lost so much weight. And something that people don't tell you about, which I really wish they did, is honestly how terrifying it is. I feel like I was so anxious, which probably didn't help with the nausea, didn't help with getting sick, didn't help with my health and the way that I was feeling. I think that my mental state definitely made me feel worse because I was so anxious, so scared. Every time I was cramping, I was terrified. Anytime I was throwing up too much, I was terrified. I cramped really bad, and they felt like severe period cramps, and I would just be so scared to go to the bathroom every single time I felt those cramps. And I feel like people don't talk about that, like how terrifying that first trimester is, especially when you're a first-time mom. You don't know what's normal and what's not normal. You don't know how it usually feels. Like I've been through this before, so I know this is normal for my body. Like there isn't any of that. So yeah, it was pretty terrifying. And something else that I realized after I was pregnant, and I was just looking a bunch of stuff up, and it just so happened when I found out I was pregnant, like every influencer I ever follow is also pregnant. So I was just watching all of their first trimester, and something that they all talked about was like this lack of motivation. And I wish people told you more about that, because that's how I felt. I was so unmotivated, so exhausted all the time. It was hard to make myself work. It was hard. Like our apartment was a mess. I didn't cook dinner, mostly because the smell of it made me want to throw up. Anytime Kyle would eat something, I would make him go far away from me. Even like I couldn't stand the smell of my dogs. That's another thing I guess I didn't say, is like my sense of smell. Like everything smelled awful to me. I didn't like my dogs being too close to me, because even sometimes like the smell of their breath would make me vomit. Just smelling certain foods would make me throw up. It was really rough. But anyways, as I was saying, the lack of motivation, like I just had no desire no motivation to do anything. I could just lay on the couch all day and be perfectly fine doing that. And it was really, really hard for me to be working during that first trimester. I contemplated not working anymore so many times because I just could not do it. I would like be on, and I honestly think this is the first time I was ever thankful for not being able to go into work. Like I'm still working from home, and I was so thankful for that during that 15-week span, because I don't know how I could have done that if I physically had to go into work. I genuinely don't know how I would have survived. Like I was on Zoom meetings and would have to mute my microphone and mute my video. I would go throw up, come back to my work meeting and carry on. And I would throw up a handful of times during the work meetings. I mean, even my coworkers I didn't know I was pregnant. They're like, are you okay? Like, you look pretty sick. Do you need to like hop off? Like, it was really bad. Or my chief of staff would call me and my voice is all raspy from throwing up. And once I finally told her I was pregnant, she was like, you know, the few times I called you and you sounded like that, I thought maybe you were just hungover or something, which is so funny. She's like, but now it makes more sense. So yeah, it was really, that's how bad it was. Working during the first trimester was really hard, but I'm obviously thankful that I have a job and I'm able to work and that I was able to do my job from home. Like, obviously so thankful for all of that, but it still sucked and was really hard. And I literally called my mom every day and was like, I cannot believe that you went into work and endured this, like, during the work day. But the lack of motivation, I keep getting sidetracked from that point. You genuinely have no desire to do anything. Literally anything ever. Also, something else that I'll say that I experienced a lot in pregnancy was just the exhaustion. I could sleep. I was going to bed 7 p.m. and not waking up until like 8 a.m. the next day. Before I got pregnant, I went and worked out 6 a.m. just about every single morning without fail. That did not happen anymore. I obviously stopped working out completely because I wasn't eating, or drinking water, because I was throwing it all up. So working out just would not have been it for me during the first trimester. And it was really rough. And like I said, the whole time, even when I was taking the nausea medication that they gave me, I still was throwing up all the time, constantly. It was awful. It was terrible. I would go eat. I would have days where I thought I felt better, so I would eat something and then just immediately come home and throw it up. I got so terrified of throwing up. I think I am still terrified of throwing up. It's like so traumatizing, actually. Like, I never want to throw up again for the rest of my life because that's how much I was throwing up. It was traumatizing a little bit. So safe to say, my first trimester was just not glamorous at all. And it was really rough, and I didn't think I would make it through it, truly. Like, I didn't know how I was gonna get through it. It was like one of the most difficult things, which sounds so crazy and so dramatic, but it's so true. It was like the first time in my life where I realized like I had no autonomy over my own body. I had no control. There was nothing I could do to make my body feel better. And I was used to always having that autonomy over my body. And I'd never ever been that sick before in my life either. Even when I got the flu, even when I got food poisoning, I never felt that sick. And for me, I was just really terrified that it was never going to end. I was terrified that I was going to feel that way my entire pregnancy. And anyways, yeah. And literally, just to put in perspective how much weight I lost, when I got to my second trimester, my doctor was like, you need to eat to where you gain about 1/2 pound a week. And that was crazy to me. I feel like as women, we're never told really, like, you need to gain weight. I mean, at least I've never been that way. So that was also a really interesting relationship, which I guess that's more of a second trimester update. Something to update you guys on as well that I was experiencing in my first trimester. You're overwhelmed with all these hormones. I'm exhausted. I'm basically starving, but I don't feel starving, but I am starving. It's just like my body was so run down. I was so exhausted. I was so emotional. My hormones were on 1000, and I was told when I was little that I was a carrier for a blood disorder. And I was super anxious about the sex of the baby, because if it was a girl, she would just be a carrier. She could go about life. If it was a boy, there's a 50-50 chance he could have it, and his life would look really different because he'd have hemophilia. So I was very stressed about that. Of course, it's a boy. And I was so excited, and I always wanted to be a boy mom, but then I immediately felt the anxiousness, and I was scared, and we had to like go meet with genetic counselors, and I would leave those appointments just bawling uncontrollably for hours with the things that they would tell me, and it was terrifying. And I immediately felt like what it is, that terrifying feeling of being a parent. It's just like you want your kid to be okay, and you don't want their life to be harder than it needs to be, and you want to do everything in your power to make them okay. And when there's nothing you can do to make it better, there's like this feeling of hopelessness, and that's what I was feeling. I was also feeling this guilt because I was the carrier, so I felt guilty, like I'm responsible if he does have it, and if he does have to like live a life of like that's completely different because he now has this blood disorder that affects how he goes through his day-to-day life. And I felt responsible for it, so that guilt, that like mom guilt that I put on myself, just being terrified, that feeling of hopelessness. I mean, you can ask Kyle, like I bawled my eyes out for weeks, just crying, and I was so stressed out, and I was so scared. And there's also just so many moving parts because Kyle's contract was up, so it's like, do I go home to give birth? Do we stay here? Where are the better doctors? Is it really even smart for us to be transferring doctors and trying to relay all this information if he could be born with this and everyone here already knows everything? And it was just terrifying. And the stress of the lifestyle that we already live, this very nomadic, you never know what's gonna happen lifestyle, coupled with being pregnant, coupled with this, I was so terrified of the health of my child, and I just let it consume me. I mean, and I think that's probably why I also struggled to work, and maybe why I also felt unmotivated, because I was so exhausted on all fronts. My body was exhausted, I was mentally exhausted, I was emotionally exhausted. So it was a really hard time for me. But we got some really good news recently, and it sounds like when I was younger, the doctors misdiagnosed me. So I'm actually not a carrier for a blood disorder. So that's something I literally found out last week. I'm now 20 weeks, so I went the entirety of my pregnancy up until last week being kind of stressed about that. But I think also eventually, maybe like 2-3 weeks ago, I kind of flipped a switch in my brain that it was like, my baby is healthy. Like, I'm not gonna speak into existence that life. I mean, obviously, also there's so much about hemophilia. You can look it up. People live perfectly normal lives and are healthy, but there's also moderate and there's also severe versions. And I just want you to keep in mind, when I was speaking to the genetic counselors, they were telling me about the most severe possible version and the kind of life he would live, because it's their job to prepare you for every scenario that could happen. So of course, when you're being told the worst case, you think worst case. So anyways, but I did like flip the switch in my brain where I was like, you know what, my baby is healthy. And I just kept saying that, like, my baby is healthy. Like, I'm not gonna talk like he isn't, because I know that he is. So I feel like in a way I spoke it into existence, that he is a healthy baby boy, because now that they ran some tests, actually how I found out was that they ran another test on my little gene sequence, because they wanted to find out which part of my genes, I'm totally not explaining this right, but they wanted to figure out which gene in my genetic sequence was the carrier for the blood disorder, because they could possibly predict whether it would be moderate or severe if he did have it, just to help us prepare a bit more. And in doing that, everything came back negative, which means none of my genes tested positive as a carrier for the blood disorder. And basically what the genetic counselor told me is that I was most likely misdiagnosed as a kid. Doesn't mean I still don't have blood issues, because I very well do, and I still have to be careful and get my blood clots tested and all that kind of stuff right before I give birth. But she's like, it's highly unlikely that you are a carrier, which means it's highly unlikely that this baby has it. So it's such good news, so relieving. But I just want to put that out there, that like the power of your words is so true. I mean, it says that in the Bible, how your words can speak life or they can speak death. So I really truly think that I spoke that into existence, by constantly speaking life over my baby. Like, I truly believe that. So anyways, it started out rough and very stressful, but it's now not even a factor in my pregnancy anymore, which I'm super thankful for. But yeah, now I'm well into the second trimester, chugging along, feeling great. I mostly just have an achy body, which I will do a second trimester update and let you guys know how my second trimester was for me. But so far, I'm very much enjoying it because I'm not throwing up every day and I can eat pretty much everything now. So it's a very happy day. But I think that's it. I think that's all I have to update you guys on. Let me know what else you want to know pregnancy related. If you have more questions about my first trimester, drop them below. If there's like a must-have videos you want me to make, let me know. Seriously though, with the nausea, nothing helped. I tried everything. I tried mint, I tried ginger, I tried the chews, I tried the Preggy Pops. I like literally anything in the world that you could try for nausea, I did not work for me. But I know some people have success with that, but it did not help me at all. So I don't really know if I have a must-haves. I do for sure have a second trimester must-have list, but first trimester I was in survival mode and nothing was really helping me. So I don't think that would be very helpful, but for sure, let me know what videos you guys want to see. Let me know what pregnancy related videos you guys want to see. And that's it. Thank you for watching and I will catch you in my next video.